In the quiet corners of a rain-soaked playground, a young girl named Lily sits alone, drenched and shivering, with fear in her eyes and a heartbreaking secret she can't share. Miss Evelyn, a compassionate teacher, is determined to unravel the mystery behind Lily's silence. What would drive a child to say, "I don't want to go home"? As the walls around Lily slowly start to crumble, Miss Evelyn embarks on a journey filled with emotional twists and turns, a journey that will test her strength and compassion. The last bell of the day echoed through the empty halls, signaling the end of another school day. Miss Evelyn, known for her patience and compassion, moved through her classroom with the ease of routine. Outside, the sky had darkened, and a steady rain began to fall, droplets tapping against the windows. Miss Evelyn paused, her gaze drifting to the playground outside. Normally bustling with children's laughter, it was eerily quiet. But something caught her eye, a small figure huddled on a bench, motionless in the downpour. Frowning, she moved closer to the window. The figure was a young girl, no more than 7 or 8, her thin frame hunched, arms wrapped tightly around herself. Her dark hair was plastered to her face, and her clothes were soaked through, clinging to her small body. Miss Evelyn's heart ached at the sight. Most students had either gone home or were waiting under the covered area for their parents. But this girl, sitting alone in the rain, looked as though she had been forgotten, or worse, abandoned. Without hesitation, Miss Evelyn grabbed her coat and hurried outside, the cold rain immediately soaking through her clothes. She approached the girl cautiously, not wanting to startle her. "Hey there," she called softly, her voice warm. "What are you doing out here all by yourself?" The girl didn't respond at first, remaining curled up on the bench, her head bowed. Up close, Miss Evelyn could see that she was shivering, her face pale with dark circles under her eyes. Miss Evelyn knelt beside her, holding her coat over both of them to shield the girl from the rain. "Sweetheart, it's too cold to be out here. Can I help you? Do you have someone coming to pick you up?" Finally, the girl looked up, her brown eyes filled with a mix of fear and uncertainty. She shook her head slowly but didn't speak. Her lips trembled, whether from the cold or from holding back tears, Miss Evelyn couldn't tell. "My name is Miss Evelyn," she continued gently. "I'm one of the teachers here." "What's your name?" The girl hesitated before whispering, "Lily." "That's a beautiful name," Miss Evelyn said with a kind smile. "Lily, why don't we go inside and get you warmed up? You're soaking wet out here." Lily glanced around the empty playground, as if expecting someone to appear. When no one did, she nodded slowly. Miss Evelyn offered her hand, which Lily took after a brief hesitation. Her small hand was ice cold, sending a shiver of concern through Miss Evelyn. She led Lily back into the school, her mind racing with questions. Where were Lily's parents? Why was she alone? And why hadn't anyone come looking for her? Once inside, Miss Evelyn guided Lily to her classroom. She helped her out of her drenched coat and wrapped a blanket around her shoulders. Lily sat down in one of the small chairs near Miss Evelyn's desk, still shivering despite the warmth of the room. "Let's get you something hot to drink," Miss Evelyn suggested, moving toward the small kitchenette at the back of the classroom. She filled a mug with warm water and stirred in hot chocolate, the rich scent filling the room. Lily accepted the mug with both hands, cradling it like a lifeline. She took a tentative sip, then another, as if the warmth was slowly thawing her from the inside out. Miss Evelyn pulled up a chair beside her, carefully considering her next words. "Lily, can you tell me why you were out there in the rain? Are you waiting for someone?" Lily shook her head again, staring into her mug. "No one's coming," she murmured so quietly that Miss Evelyn almost didn't hear her. A chill ran down Miss Evelyn's spine. "Did you miss your bus? Or, did something happen at home?" Lily's grip tightened on the mug, and she hunched her shoulders as if trying to make herself smaller. The silence stretched out, heavy with unspoken words that seemed too much for Lily to carry. Miss Evelyn's mind raced. This was more than just a missed bus or a misunderstanding. But she knew she couldn't push too hard, not yet. Lily needed to feel safe before she could open up. "Okay, Ms. Evelyn said softly, "You don't have to talk about it if you don't want to. But I want you to know that you're safe here. I'm going to help you, whatever's going on." Lily looked up, and for the first time, Ms. Evelyn saw a flicker of something in her eyes, relief, maybe, or hope. But it was quickly masked by the same guarded expression. The rain outside continued to fall, echoing the tension in the room. Miss Evelyn's thoughts were racing. She knew she needed to contact someone, perhaps the school office, or even the authorities, but whatever she did next had to be done carefully. For now, she focused on making Lily comfortable. She found a dry change of clothes from the lost and found box and brought them back to the classroom. "You can change into these if you'd like," Ms. Evelyn said, placing the clothes on the chair beside Lily. "They'll be warmer than what you're wearing." Lily nodded and took the clothes, retreating to the small bathroom attached to the classroom to change. When she emerged, the oversized sweatshirt and sweatpants made her look even smaller, but at least she wasn't shivering anymore. Miss Evelyn decided to try one more time. "Lily, do you remember where you live? I could call someone for you, maybe a family member or a neighbor." Lily hesitated again, then shook her head. "I don't want to go home," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Miss Evelyn's heart sank. This was more serious than she had feared. She didn't know the full story yet, but it was clear that Lily was in some kind of trouble, and going home wasn't an option she was willing to consider. "All right," Miss Evelyn said gently, "you don't have to go home if you don't want to. But I do need to make sure you're safe. Would it be okay if I called someone who can help?" Lily looked at her for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Finally, she gave a small nod. Miss Evelyn forced a smile, though her mind was already racing with the steps she needed to take next. She knew this was just the beginning of a long, difficult road, but she was determined to see it through. Lily needed someone in her corner, and Miss Evelyn was ready to be that person, no matter what it took. The classroom was quiet except for the soft hum of the heater working overtime to chase away the chill that had settled in the air. Miss Evelyn sat at her desk, her eyes flicking between the paperwork she was pretending to organize and the small girl seated across the room. Lily was still, her focus fixed on the now empty mug of hot chocolate in her hands, her expression unreadable. Miss Evelyn had seen many children in her years of teaching, each with their own stories and struggles. But there was something about Lily that tugged at her differently. The girl's silence was heavy, filled with an unspoken weight that seemed too much for her to bear. Deciding it was time to break the silence, Miss Evelyn pushed aside the papers and walked over to Lily. She knelt down so that she was at eye level with the girl, her voice gentle and encouraging. "Lily, would you like to tell me more about why you don't want to go home?" Lily's eyes flicked up to meet Miss Evelyn's, then quickly dropped back down to her mug. She shook her head slightly, the movement so small it was almost imperceptible. Miss Evelyn wasn't surprised by the response, but it still tugged at her heart. She tried a different approach. "Is there someone else I could call for you? Maybe a friend, or another family member?" Lily hesitated, and for a brief moment, it looked like she might say something. But then, just as quickly, she retreated back into her silence, her lips pressed into a thin line. Miss Evelyn sighed inwardly, realizing that whatever Lily had been through, it had left her wary of trusting anyone. This wasn't something that could be solved in a single conversation. It would take time, patience, and a lot of care to help Lily feel safe enough to open up. She stood up and walked back to her desk, picking up the phone with a sense of reluctance. She knew she needed to notify the school office, at the very least. But before she made the call, she tried one last time. "Lily, I'm going to call the office so we can get some help for you. But I want you to know that no matter what happens, I'm here for you, okay? You're not alone." Lily didn't respond, but there was a slight shift in her posture, a subtle easing of the tension in her small frame. It wasn't much, but it was something, and Ms. Evelyn held onto that as she dialed the number. The conversation with the school office was brief and to the point. Ms. Evelyn explained the situation as best as she could without revealing too much in front of Lily. She requested that the principal and the school counselor be notified immediately, and they agreed to send someone over to the classroom. As she hung up the phone, Miss Evelyn's thoughts raced. What could have driven a girl like Lily to such a state? There were too many possibilities, each more heartbreaking than the last. She knew better than to jump to conclusions, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. It wasn't long before there was a knock on the classroom door, and Miss Evelyn looked up to see Mrs. Davis, the school counselor, step inside. Mrs. Davis was a kind woman in her early 50s, with a soothing presence and a knack for getting children to open up. She took one look at Lily and immediately understood the gravity of the situation. "Thank you for calling me, Miss Evelyn," Mrs. Davis said quietly as she approached the desk. "Lily, I'm Mrs. Davis. I'm here to help you, okay?" Lily glanced at Mrs. Davis, then back at Miss Evelyn, her expression unreadable. She didn't speak, but she didn't shy away either, which Mrs. Davis took as a good sign. "Why don't we sit down and talk for a little bit?" Mrs. Davis suggested, motioning to the small reading nook in the corner of the classroom. "You can tell me as much or as little as you want. I'm just here to listen." Lily hesitated, but with a gentle nudge from Miss Evelyn, she slowly got up and followed Mrs. Davis to the nook. They sat down on the cushioned chairs, surrounded by bookshelves filled with colorful picture books and chapter books. It was a cozy spot, designed to make children feel comfortable, and Miss Evelyn hoped it would do the same for Lily. Miss Evelyn stayed at her desk, giving them space while still keeping an eye on the interaction. She could see Mrs. Davis speaking softly to Lily, her tone gentle and patient, but Lily's responses were still minimal, mostly nods or shakes of the head. The wall Lily had built around herself was strong, and it would take more than a few kind words to bring it down. After a while, Mrs. Davis rose and walked back over to Miss Evelyn, her expression serious. "Lily's not ready to talk yet," she said quietly, "but I'm concerned about her. We need to get in touch with Child Protective Services. This could be a case of neglect or worse." Miss Evelyn nodded, her heart heavy. "I thought as much. I want to make sure she's okay." "We'll do everything we can," Mrs. Davis assured her. "In the meantime, I'll stay with her while you finish up here." Miss Evelyn agreed and returned to her desk, trying to focus on her work, but her thoughts kept drifting back to Lily. There was something about the girl's silence that gnawed at her, as if it held the key to a mystery she wasn't yet ready to solve. She knew she needed to be patient, to let Lily come to her in her own time, but it was difficult not to feel a sense of urgency. After a few more minutes, Mrs. Davis returned to the front of the room. "I'm going to take Lily to my office," she said. "We'll wait there until someone from CPS arrives." Miss Evelyn nodded, watching as Mrs. Davis gently guided Lily out of the classroom. As the door closed behind them, the room felt suddenly empty, the echoes of their presence lingering in the quiet. Miss Evelyn sat down heavily in her chair, staring at the papers on her desk without really seeing them. She knew she had done the right thing by calling for help, but that didn't make it any easier. Lily was just a child, and whatever had happened to her was far beyond what any child should have to endure. She spent the next hour trying to distract herself with work, but her thoughts kept returning to Lily, to the fear in her eyes and the weight of her silence. It was a heavy burden to bear, even for an experienced teacher like Miss Evelyn. Eventually, the school day officially ended, and Miss Evelyn began to pack up her things, moving mechanically as she prepared to head home. But just as she was about to leave, her phone rang. It was Mrs. Davis. "Miss Evelyn," she said, her voice urgent, "I think you should come to my office. Lily asked for you." Miss Evelyn's heart skipped a beat. "I'll be right there," she replied, grabbing her coat and hurrying out of the classroom. When she arrived at Mrs. Davis's office, she found Lily sitting in one of the chairs, looking small and lost. The girl's eyes were red, and she was clutching the blanket from the classroom like a security blanket. Miss Evelyn knelt down beside her. "Lily," she said softly, "I'm here. What's going on?" Lily looked at her, and for the first time, Miss Evelyn saw a crack in the wall the girl had built around herself. Tears welled up in Lily's eyes, and she whispered, "Please don't leave me." Miss Evelyn's heart broke at the sound of those words, so simple yet filled with so much pain. She reached out and gently took Lily's hand. "I'm not going anywhere," she promised. "I'm here with you, no matter what." Lily clung to her hand, her grip tight, as if she was afraid Miss Evelyn might disappear if she let go. It was a small gesture, but it spoke volumes. Miss Evelyn knew that the road ahead would be difficult, filled with challenges and heartache. But she also knew that she wasn't alone. Lily had reached out to her, and she was determined to be the steady presence the girl needed. As they sat there in the quiet of Mrs. Davis's office, Miss Evelyn realized that this was just the beginning of a long journey. But she was ready to walk it, step by step, with Lily by her side. The next morning, Miss Evelyn arrived at school earlier than usual. The sky was still a muted gray, and the hallways were eerily quiet, the only sound being the occasional creak of the old building settling into the day. She made her way to Mrs. Davis's office, her mind heavy with thoughts of Lily. The previous day's events lingered in her mind like a shadow, the image of Lily's tearful eyes and her desperate plea not to be left alone etched into her memory. Miss Evelyn knew she couldn't ignore the situation. Something was clearly very wrong, and she was determined to help in any way she could. As she reached Mrs. Davis's office, she knocked softly, not wanting to disturb any conversation that might be happening inside. The door opened almost immediately, and Mrs. Davis greeted her with a weary but kind smile. "Good morning, Miss Evelyn," she said, stepping aside to let her in. "I'm glad you're here. Lily's been asking for you." Miss Evelyn's heart clenched at the words. She nodded, stepping into the office where Lily was curled up in a chair, her knees drawn to her chest and her arms wrapped tightly around them. She looked so small, so fragile, that it was hard to believe she was the same child who had sat silently in the rain just a day before. "Hi, Lily," Miss Evelyn said softly, walking over to her and kneeling down to be at eye level. "How are you feeling this morning?" Lily looked at her with those wide, fearful eyes, and after a moment, she shrugged, a small, uncertain movement that spoke volumes. "I'm glad you're here," Miss Evelyn continued, keeping her tone light and gentle. "I was thinking, maybe after breakfast, we could go for a little walk. Just you and me. Does that sound okay?" Lily hesitated, her gaze flicking to Mrs. Davis as if seeking her approval. Mrs. Davis nodded encouragingly, and finally, Lily gave a small nod of her own. "That sounds good," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Miss Evelyn smiled, feeling a glimmer of hope. "Great. Let's go get something to eat first, then." They left Mrs. Davis's office and walked down the hallway to the cafeteria, where the smell of pancakes and syrup filled the air. The school's breakfast program was in full swing, with students lining up to grab their morning meals. Miss Evelyn guided Lily to a table near the corner, away from the noise and bustle, and sat down with her. Lily picked at her food, clearly not having much of an appetite, but Miss Evelyn didn't push her. Instead, she made small talk, commenting on the weather, asking Lily about her favorite foods, and telling her a funny story about one of her past students. Lily responded with nods or shakes of the head, but the corners of her mouth twitched upwards once or twice, and that was enough to keep Miss Evelyn talking. Once breakfast was over, Miss Evelyn led Lily outside. The rain had stopped, leaving the world damp and cool, with the scent of wet earth lingering in the air. The playground was empty, the swings still glistening with raindrops, and the grass was slick beneath their feet. They walked in silence for a while, following the path that wound around the school grounds. Miss Evelyn kept her pace slow, letting Lily set the rhythm, and they eventually found themselves at a small garden tucked away behind the building. It was a peaceful spot, with a few benches and a variety of flowers that the students helped maintain as part of a gardening club. Lily seemed to relax a little in the quiet of the garden, her shoulders losing some of their tension. She wandered over to one of the flower beds and crouched down, gently touching the petals of a bright orange marigold. "Do you like flowers?" Miss Evelyn asked, sitting down on a nearby bench and watching her carefully. Lily nodded, her fingers brushing against the leaves. "My mom used to grow roses," she murmured, almost to herself. Miss Evelyn's breath caught. It was the first time Lily had mentioned anything about her home life, and she didn't want to disrupt the moment. She waited, letting the silence stretch, hoping Lily would continue. Lily traced the edge of a leaf with her finger, her brow furrowing slightly. She loved them. Said they were her favorite because they were beautiful but had thorns, so they could protect themselves. Miss Evelyn smiled softly. Roses are beautiful flowers, she agreed. It sounds like your mom knew a lot about them. Lily didn't respond immediately. Instead, she plucked a stray weed from the flower bed and twirled it between her fingers. She used to take care of the garden every day, she said after a long pause. But she doesn't do that anymore. Miss Evelyn's heart ached at the sadness in Lily's voice. She could sense that they were getting closer to whatever it was that Lily was holding back, but she didn't want to push too hard. She needed to let Lily come to her own conclusions, to open up when she was ready. I'm sure she still loves roses, Miss Evelyn said gently. Maybe she just needs some help with the garden now. Lily shook her head, her movements slow and deliberate. She doesn't care about them anymore, she whispered. She doesn't care about anything. The weight of those words hung in the air, heavy and oppressive. Miss Evelyn felt a lump form in her throat as she realized the depth of the situation. Whatever had happened in Lily's home, it had affected not just Lily, but her mother as well. Miss Evelyn wanted to ask more, to understand what had led to this, but she knew she had to be careful. Lily was already so fragile, and the last thing she wanted was to make her retreat back into her shell. Instead, she decided to share a little of her own story. You know, Lily, she began softly, when I was about your age, I used to spend a lot of time in my grandmother's garden. She had the most beautiful flowers, roses, daisies, sunflowers, you name it. I used to think that garden was a magical place where nothing bad could ever happen. Lily looked up at her, curiosity flickering in her eyes. But as I got older, Ms. Evelyn continued, I realized that even the most beautiful gardens need care and attention. If you ignore them, the weeds start to take over, and the flowers can't grow like they should. It's the same with people, I think. Sometimes, when life gets hard, it's easy to stop caring about the things we love. But that doesn't mean we don't still love them deep down. Lily absorbed Miss Evelyn's words, her fingers still idly playing with the weed in her hand. There was a long silence, and then, in a voice so soft it was almost a whisper, she said, I don't think she loves me anymore. Miss Evelyn felt her heart break a little at the confession. She wanted to reach out, to hug Lily and tell her that wasn't true, that she was loved and valued, but she knew that words alone wouldn't be enough to heal the wounds Lily carried. Instead, she spoke carefully, choosing her words with the utmost care. I know it might feel that way, Lily, but sometimes when people are hurting, they forget how to show their love. It doesn't mean they don't love you, it just means they're going through something difficult. Lily stared at the weed in her hand, her expression unreadable. She used to take care of me, she whispered, more to herself than to Miss Evelyn. But now it's like I'm not even there. Miss Evelyn's throat tightened. She could feel the tears threatening to spill, but she held them back, knowing that Lily needed her to be strong. I'm so sorry, Lily, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I'm so sorry you've had to go through this. But I'm here now, and I'm not going anywhere. You don't have to go through this alone. Lily's eyes filled with tears, and for a moment, it seemed like she might finally break down. But then she wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, her expression hardening once more. Thank you, she said quietly, though the words sounded distant, as if she were speaking from behind a wall that she had carefully rebuilt. Miss Evelyn nodded, her heart heavy with the realization that there was still so much they hadn't uncovered. But she knew that she had made progress, however small it might seem. Lily had opened up to her, if only a little, and that was the first step on the long road to healing. They sat together in the garden for a while longer, the silence between them no longer heavy but instead filled with a tentative understanding. Miss Evelyn didn't push for more answers, content to let Lily take her time. She knew that the truth, whatever it was, would come out eventually. But for now, she was just grateful to be there for Lily, to offer her a safe space in a world that had become so frightening and uncertain. As they walked back to the school building, Miss Evelyn made a silent promise to herself. She would do whatever it took to help Lily, no matter how difficult or complicated it might be. Because Lily deserved more than just a teacher, she deserved someone who would fight for her, who would show her that she wasn't alone in the world. And Miss Evelyn was determined to be that person, every step of the way. The days following Lily's small confession passed slowly, each one blending into the next. Miss Evelyn found herself thinking about Lily constantly, during her lessons, while grading papers, and even in the quiet moments at home. There was a growing sense of urgency in her heart, a need to understand the full extent of Lily's situation and to find a way to help her before it was too late. Lily continued to come to school, but she remained guarded, her walls firmly in place. She participated in class, but her interactions were minimal, her answers brief. It was as if she had built an invisible barrier around herself, and Miss Evelyn couldn't help but worry that Lily was slipping further away. One afternoon, after the final bell had rung and the other students had rushed out to enjoy their afternoon, Miss Evelyn noticed Lily lingering near the door of the classroom. She was fidgeting with the straps of her backpack, her eyes darting around the room as if she were unsure whether to stay or go. Miss Evelyn approached her slowly, keeping her tone light. "Lily, is everything okay?" Lily looked up at her, and for a moment, Miss Evelyn saw a flash of something in her eyes, fear, uncertainty, maybe even desperation. But just as quickly, it was gone, replaced by the familiar guarded expression. I don't want to go home," Lily murmured, her voice trembling. Miss Evelyn's heart skipped a beat. It was the first time Lily had expressed anything so directly since that day in the garden, and it confirmed what she had feared all along: something was very wrong at home. She knelt down beside Lily, trying to keep her voice steady despite the worry gnawing at her insides. "Why don't you want to go home, Lily? Did something happen?" Lily bit her lip, her small hands clutching the straps of her backpack so tightly that her knuckles turned white. She looked around the empty classroom as if searching for an escape, but when she found none, she finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. It's not safe there." The words hit Miss Evelyn like a punch to the gut. She had suspected that Lily's home life wasn't ideal, but to hear her say it wasn't safe was something else entirely. She struggled to keep her emotions in check, knowing that she needed to be strong for Lily. "Lily," Miss Evelyn said gently, "if it's not safe at home, you don't have to go back. We can find somewhere safe for you to stay, where you'll be taken care of." Lily looked up at her, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and hope. "But what if they find out?" she whispered, her voice shaking. "What if they get mad?" Miss Evelyn's heart broke at the fear in Lily's voice. No child should have to live in fear of their own home, and the fact that Lily was so afraid of what might happen if she spoke up only confirmed the seriousness of the situation. "I won't let anyone hurt you, Lily," Miss Evelyn promised, her voice firm. "You're safe here with me, and we'll make sure you stay safe." Lily's eyes filled with tears, and she quickly wiped them away with the back of her hand. I don't know what to do," she whispered, her voice cracking. Miss Evelyn reached out and gently took Lily's hand, squeezing it reassuringly. "You don't have to do anything alone," she said softly. "I'm here with you, and we'll figure this out together." Lily nodded, but her grip on Miss Evelyn's hand tightened, as if she were afraid to let go. They stayed like that for a long moment, the silence between them filled with unspoken fears and hopes. Finally, Miss Evelyn spoke again, her voice calm but determined. "Lily, I'm going to call Mrs. Davis, the school counselor, and we'll talk to her together. She'll help us find a safe place for you, and she'll make sure you're protected." Lily hesitated, her eyes searching Miss Evelyn's for reassurance. "Will you stay with me?" she asked, her voice barely audible. "Of course," Miss Evelyn replied without hesitation. "I'm not going anywhere." With that, Miss Evelyn led Lily to Mrs. Davis's office. As they walked through the quiet hallways, she kept a steady, comforting hand on Lily's shoulder, hoping to give her some sense of security. When they arrived, Mrs. Davis looked up from her desk, immediately sensing the gravity of the situation. Lily, Miss Evelyn, Mrs. Davis greeted them, her voice warm and understanding. "Come in, have a seat." Lily clung to Miss Evelyn's hand as they sat down together in the chairs across from Mrs. Davis. The counselor's office was a cozy space, filled with soft colors and comfortable furniture meant to put students at ease. But even in this safe environment, Lily's tension was palpable. Mrs. Davis leaned forward slightly, her expression gentle. "Lily, Miss Evelyn mentioned that you're feeling scared about going home. Would you like to tell me a little more about that?" Lily glanced at Miss Evelyn, who gave her an encouraging nod. She took a deep breath, then slowly began to speak, her voice trembling. It's my parents," Lily started, her hands twisting nervously in her lap. "They used to be different, before everything happened. But now, they don't really talk to me, and when they do, it's like they're angry all the time. I try to stay out of the way, but sometimes it's like they forget I'm even there." Miss Evelyn's heart ached as she listened to Lily's words. She could see the pain and confusion in the girl's eyes, the struggle to make sense of a situation that was far beyond her years. Mrs. Davis nodded slowly, her expression compassionate. "I'm so sorry you've been going through this, Lily. It sounds really difficult. Have they ever hurt you physically, or made you feel unsafe in any other way?" Lily hesitated, then nodded slightly, her eyes filling with tears. "Sometimes, when they get really mad, they yell and throw things. And once my dad grabbed me really hard. He didn't mean to, but it scared me." Miss Evelyn had to fight to keep her emotions in check, a wave of anger and sorrow washing over her. No child should ever have to endure such fear, especially not from the people who were supposed to protect and care for her. Mrs. Davis's expression grew more serious, but her tone remained calm and gentle. "Lily, thank you for telling us this. You're very brave. I want you to know that what's happening at home isn't your fault, and it's not okay for anyone to make you feel scared or unsafe." Lily looked down at her lap, tears slipping silently down her cheeks. Miss Evelyn squeezed her hand again, offering what little comfort she could. Mrs. Davis continued, her voice steady. "We're going to make sure you're safe, Lily. I'm going to call Child Protective Services, and they'll help us find a safe place for you to stay while we figure out what's best for you." Lily's grip on Miss Evelyn's hand tightened, but she nodded, her tears still falling. "Okay," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Miss Evelyn felt a surge of protectiveness for the small girl beside her. She knew that the road ahead would be difficult and that there were no easy answers, but she was determined to see it through. Lily needed someone to stand by her side, and Miss Evelyn was ready to be that person, no matter what it took. As Mrs. Davis picked up the phone to make the call, Miss Evelyn stayed close to Lily, holding her hand and offering quiet words of comfort. She knew that this was only the beginning of a long and painful journey, but she also knew that Lily had taken the first step, a step toward safety, toward healing, and toward a future where she wouldn't have to live in fear. And as they sat together in that small office, Miss Evelyn silently promised herself that she would be there for every step of the way, ready to help Lily find the peace and security she so desperately needed. A few weeks had passed since that afternoon in Mrs. Davis's office. The days that followed were a whirlwind of meetings, paperwork, and tense conversations with social workers. Miss Evelyn had been involved every step of the way, making sure that Lily's voice was heard, that her needs were met, and that she was placed in a safe environment. It had been a difficult process, but one that was necessary to ensure Lily's well-being. Lily had been temporarily placed with a foster family who lived just outside of town. Miss Evelyn had met them during the transition, and she could see the warmth and kindness in their eyes. They were a middle-aged couple, Mr. and Mrs. Parker, who had fostered children before and understood the challenges ahead. They had a cozy home with a garden in the back, and they welcomed Lily with open arms, giving her space to adjust at her own pace. Despite the kindness of her new surroundings, Lily's transition hadn't been easy. She was still quiet, still guarded, and Miss Evelyn knew that it would take time for her to truly feel safe again. But there were small signs of progress, moments when Lily would smile, or when she would talk about something she enjoyed, like reading or drawing. These glimpses of the bright, hopeful child she had once been gave Miss Evelyn hope. One crisp autumn afternoon, Miss Evelyn decided to visit Lily at the Parkers' home. She had promised Lily that she would stay in touch, and she intended to keep that promise. The drive to the Parkers' house was peaceful, the trees lining the road ablaze with the colors of fall. When she arrived, Mrs. Parker greeted her at the door with a warm smile and a hug. "It's so good to see you, Miss Evelyn," Mrs. Parker said, leading her inside. "Lily's in the garden. She's been spending a lot of time out there. It seems to be her favorite place." Miss Evelyn's heart warmed at the thought. She followed Mrs. Parker through the cozy house and out the back door, where she found Lily sitting on a small bench beneath a large oak tree. She was holding a sketchbook on her lap, her focus entirely on the page as she carefully drew something with a pencil. "Hi, Lily," Miss Evelyn called softly as she approached. Lily looked up, and a small smile tugged at the corners of her mouth. "Hi, Miss Evelyn," she replied, closing her sketchbook and setting it aside. Miss Evelyn sat down on the bench beside her, taking in the peaceful surroundings. The garden was beautiful, filled with vibrant flowers and tall trees that rustled gently in the breeze. She could see why Lily found comfort here. It was a place where she could breathe, where she could feel connected to something alive and growing. "What are you drawing?" Miss Evelyn asked, nodding toward the sketchbook. Lily hesitated for a moment, then opened the book to reveal a detailed drawing of a rose bush in full bloom. The roses were intricately shaded, their petals soft and delicate, with thorns carefully drawn along the stems. Miss Evelyn's breath caught in her throat as she looked at the drawing. It was beautiful, but more than that, it was a reflection of the Lily she had come to know, a girl who had endured pain, but who still held on to something beautiful inside. "Lily, this is amazing," Miss Evelyn said sincerely. "You have such a talent for drawing." Lily's cheeks flushed with pride, and she looked down at the sketchbook, tracing one of the roses with her finger. "I like drawing," she admitted quietly. "It helps me think." Miss Evelyn nodded, understanding all too well. Sometimes, when things are hard, having something like this, something you can focus on and pour your feelings into, can really help. "I'm glad you have your drawing." Lily looked up at Miss Evelyn, and for the first time, her gaze was steady, unafraid. "I'm glad you came to see me," she said, her voice soft but sincere. "I promised I would," Miss Evelyn replied with a smile. "And I'll keep visiting, as often as you'd like. You're important to me, Lily. I want to make sure you know that." Lily didn't say anything at first, but Miss Evelyn could see the emotions swirling in her eyes: gratitude, relief, and perhaps even a glimmer of happiness. Finally, Lily spoke, her voice tinged with a vulnerability that made Miss Evelyn's heart ache. "Miss Evelyn, do you think things will ever get better? Will I ever feel normal again?" Miss Evelyn paused, choosing her words carefully. She knew that there was no simple answer, no magic phrase that could erase the pain Lily had experienced. But she also knew that there was hope, even in the darkest of times. "Lily," she began gently, "what you've been through is something no one should ever have to face. It's going to take time, maybe a long time, to heal from that. But I do believe that things can get better. You're strong, and you have so much light inside of you. With time, and with the love and support of people who care about you, I think you'll find your way back to feeling okay again." Lily absorbed Miss Evelyn's words, her expression thoughtful. "Do you really think so?" she asked, her voice small. "I do," Miss Evelyn said firmly. "And I'll be here to help you every step of the way. You're not alone in this, Lily." For a moment, they sat in silence, the weight of the conversation hanging between them. Then, slowly, Lily reached out and took Miss Evelyn's hand, holding it tightly. It was a simple gesture, but it spoke volumes. It was a sign of trust, of connection, and of a bond that had grown stronger through the trials they had faced together. "Thank you," Lily whispered, her voice filled with emotion. "Thank you for everything." Miss Evelyn squeezed Lily's hand gently, her heart full. "You don't have to thank me, Lily. I'm just glad I could be here for you." As the afternoon light began to fade, Miss Evelyn and Lily continued to talk, their conversation lightening as they discussed books, art, and the changing seasons. There was a sense of peace in the air, a feeling that, despite everything, there was hope for the future. Eventually, Miss Evelyn knew it was time to leave. She stood up, reluctant to say goodbye but knowing that this wasn't the end, just another step on the journey they were walking together. "I'll see you soon, okay?" Miss Evelyn said, smiling down at Lily. Lily nodded, her smile small but genuine. "Okay. See you soon, Miss Evelyn." As Miss Evelyn walked back to her car, she felt a sense of contentment settle over her. The road ahead would still be challenging, there were no guarantees, no easy answers, but she had seen the strength and resilience in Lily, and she knew that with time, things would get better. She drove away from the Parkers' home, the vibrant colors of the autumn leaves glowing in the fading light. And as she thought about the future, she felt a deep sense of gratitude for the journey she and Lily had begun. It was a journey that had brought them closer together, one that had shown them both the power of compassion, trust, and the belief that even in the darkest moments, there was always a chance for a new beginning. And with that thought, Miss Evelyn smiled, knowing that no matter what came next, they would face it together.